Especially if you're visiting with us, we're thankful for your presence and invite you back any opportunity that you may have. We're going to sing number 694, To Canaan's Land I'm On My Way, and then Bob is going to teach us out here in the auditorium class this evening. We'll sing the first, second, and fifth verses of this song. To Canaan's land I'm on my way, where the soul never dies. My darkest night will turn to day, where the soul never dies. No sad farewells, no tear-dimmed eyes, where all is love and the soul never dies. Are roses blooming there for me, where the soul never dies, and I will spend eternity where the soul never dies. No sad farewells, no tear-dimmed eyes, where all is love and the soul never dies. I'm on my way to that fair land where the soul never dies, where there will be no parting hand, where the soul never dies. No sad farewells, no tear-dimmed eyes, where all is love and the soul never dies.
Now you can hear me. Good evening, everybody. Figured you couldn't hear me that first shot, though. I hope you brought your Bible. Today, or tonight, we're going to go over some of the trip that we were to take. And if you've been keeping up with the news, Israel is faring well in the war that they have going on over there with Hamas. But still, if you remember, that's the reason that we decided we weren't going to go for our safety, but that part of the world is in extreme turmoil. And I would like to start this class off just saying a prayer for those folks over there. Lord, we are so blessed to be called your children, and that we have this avenue of prayer that we can bring our petitions before you. Lord, as we look around this globe and all the atrocities that happen because of sin and the evil that's in this world, and we look to the day that Hamas bombed Israel and brought that area to war, and the innocent lives that died, and then as Israel retaliates, we realize there's innocent casualties that die on both sides during war, and we just pray that you would bring peace to that area, whichever way it should come, and that would be good for the humanity. Lord, we just know that you are the creator and author, and all things are happening in this world, directed us to the second coming of your Son, and we just pray that as that day approaches, that you'd be merciful on us. And in Jesus' name, amen. So today we are going to talk, some of this might be review for you. Some of it might be first time you've heard it. So I'm doing it as just a class that we're going to start. How did we get into the Sinai Peninsula, into Goshen, and then how we started making our way out. But if we look at Sinai Peninsula, I thought I just turned it on. Maybe it was already on. There it is. Nope. Well, I seen the red light. There's my red light. So this is the Sinai Peninsula here. Let me go back where I was before we get too far ahead. It's bordered. You got the Mediterranean Sea to the north, the Gulf of Suez, the Gulf of Aqaba, and the Red Sea. This area has been in hands of many different nations. Right now, it's in the hands of Egypt, and you can kind of see the borders there. Israel at one time had some of this, and I think Randall talked about it last week, the October War. And then we had the peace accord where Israel give back some of this, but over time, this has come into hands of many different nations. If we look at on the bigger scale, you can see where the Dead Sea is, where the Sea of Galilee is, and then again, Sinai Peninsula, and then we will talk a little bit about Goshen up here. This was something that we were going to get to see on our trip. We were going to get to go underneath the Suez Canal, which would be right up in here. And this is going to be where I'm talking about the first part of this class. So if we look at paths out of Canaan, the promised land, so before it became Canaan, the promised land, when Abram was told, we had a lot of already established trail routes. You can see we got a purple road that's leading down into Egypt across the top of Sinai, and then you had the King's Highway that came down and then went across up through here. So you had well-established trade routes in this area way back before Abram made his way down here. If we look at where Abram came in, so you remember he came over from Mesopotamia up here, he came down, and then he picked one of them highways that he's going to come in across the top of Sinai as he went into Egypt, and we'll talk about him in just a minute. We talk about other peoples that used that top of Sinai because Sinai was the connected the two Asia and Africa continents. So this was Alexander the Great when he came into Egypt. He came across them same paths down into Egypt. So this is a very well-traveled area. This was traveled by militaries, by pedestrians, and we'll get into a little bit of that here in just a second. We're going to stop right there and leave this one up as we talk about this. So I want to talk about first coming in to Egypt across the Sinai Peninsula, and I'm going to back it up one right here. So we got Abraham. When Abraham first come across, if you remember the story, I'm going to go to Genesis chapter 12 here. If you got your Bibles, Genesis 12, I'm going to start in verse 20. I'm going to start in verse 10. I'm going to end in verse 20. So Abram with Sarah, so they're up here, they're over here, up north in the what he's been promised. And then we get in verse 10, now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt and sojourned there, for the famine was severe in the land. So we're going to hear that again coming up. So this is Abraham and Sarah. Again, they're coming down here, and they're going to cross the top of the peninsula. When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarah's wife, I know that you are a woman, beautiful in appearance, and when the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is my wife, then they will kill me, but they will let you live. Say you are my sister. And in verse 14, when Abram entered Egypt, Egypt saw the woman was very beautiful, and when the prince of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. And for her sake he dwelt well with Abram, and he had sheep, ox, male donkeys, male servants, female donkeys, and camels. But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh in his house with a great plague because of Sarah. So if you remember that, and then he came back and he was really angry that he was lied to about Sarah. So that's kind of our first encounter with Egypt in the Old Testament. So they travel down across the top of the peninsula, go into Egypt because there was a famine, and that's when Abram, or as we know him, Abraham, lied to Pharaoh, and a lot of stuff happened. A lot of negative impact there between Abram and the Pharaoh. We look at some other interactions, just talking about interactions. If we look at 1 Kings, I'm just going to highlight a few things about Egypt and the children of Israel. 9, verse 16. Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, had gone up to Gezer and burned it with fire, and he had killed the Canaanites who lived in the city and had given it as a dowry to his daughter, Solomon's wife. So we see here Solomon married Pharaoh's daughter in this interaction here. During the Babylonians, when they were coming in to lay siege, Jeremiah is warning them about, don't go down to Egypt. And this kind of tells us when they go down to Egypt, I'm just kind of pointing that out because we're coming across probably the top of that peninsula. So Jeremiah 42, verse 19. The Lord said to you, O remnant of Judah, do not go to Egypt. Know for certainly that I have warned you this day. So Jeremiah speaking, he's telling them, hey, this punishment's coming on you. It's here. Don't flee to Egypt. Don't do it. And what do you reckon they did? They did it. And then Jeremiah followed down there with them. So Jeremiah finished speaking to all the people, all that the word, this is 43 verse 1, all the words of the Lord their God with which the Lord had given them, had sent to them. And if we go down, skip down, in verse 7, and they came into the land of Egypt, for they did not obey the voice of the Lord, and they arrived there. Then the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah, and he did some stones and stuff. So you have the Israelites fleeing again and coming across that peninsula. Again, it's what connects Asia with Africa. So we get down in there, and then when you look at the intertestament period, we see in Matthew 2, I'm going to read this one here. This is the last one I'll read as far as the interaction. But Matthew 2, starting in verse 13, everybody's probably familiar with this. Then Jesus came from Galilee to John the Jordan. Wait a minute, let me make sure I'm in the right one here. I am in 3:13. Let me go to 2:13, because that didn't sound right. Now, when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, Rise, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him. And he arose and took the child and his mother by night and departed to Egypt. So when he arrived in Egypt, there was probably, down here, it took the same across the top of the peninsula, and there was probably a remnant left of them Jews who had left when Jeremiah told them don't go. So some of them stayed there. Some of the Jews living in Alexandria in Egypt interpreted Old Testament into Greek, and that's where you get the Septuagint that you hear Paul talking about. So that's that remnant of people that left during that time frame and stayed there in Egypt, and that's probably when Jesus went there. He wasn't the lone Jewish kid on the block. He probably went to a settlement that was there, I would think. Bible don't tell us that, but that's what I would think probably happened. So again, they're coming across that peninsula. That's kind of what I'm trying to get, the significance of that peninsula. It's connecting the two continents. Going the wrong way. So Goshen. So we find the peninsula, how it's intertwined with Israel. It's on the border. It's very intertwined in the Bible story. People traveling to and from, going across the top of that. We'll get into the bottom a little bit later in class, talking about how the Israelites fled out. But the Israelites going into Goshen. So if we look at the land of Goshen, we've talked about the Nile River, and you can see on this, this map right here how that's the fertile area. And this is the land of Goshen up through here. So we've talked about this before, being the delta of the Nile. And when you look at it on that map, it's like part of the only green part that you're going to see there. So when you talk about getting the good portion of the land, that's the good portion of the land right there. So as people were traveling across the top up here, you can see it's green. That road come across the shoreline up here. You probably had some fertile land up here, and then you're coming in and coming down. Cairo, that we talked about a few weeks ago, is right up in through here. So I want to talk about the significance of the land of Goshen. How did we get there? What's all going on? So let's turn to Genesis chapter 37. And I'm going to read 25 through 28. So to give you the background of this story, so you have the 12 sons of Israel, and you had a lot of favoritism going on in the family, which with 12 kids, you know that's probably something hard to do, not to have a favorite one. And you have that many, one of them is going to be mama's boy or daddy's boy. It's just inevitable, I think. But depending on who their mom was, you know, that played a big part in it. But the brothers' jealousy became so bad with all the dreams that Joseph was having, that he went out to check on his brothers for his dad. And that's where Joseph finds his brothers, and his brothers throw him in a pit. And they're on top of that pit debating, what should we do with them? Should we just kill him? Because a lot of the brothers, let's just kill him and be done with it. So verse 37 is kind of picking up at the end of that story where the brothers are feuding, and this is where it comes to a head. So starting in verse 25, then they sat down to eat, and looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels bearing gum, balm, myrrh on their way, carrying it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, what profit is if we just kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh, and his brothers listened to him. The Midianite traders passed by, drew Joseph up out, and lifted him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. Then they took Joseph to Egypt. So that's the story. So we are coming down to Egypt now. So they sold their brother, and I would say that path up here, that path that came down here, the King's Highway, is probably one of the highways, since that's a traveled road. That's where traders have been traveling. One of them roads up through there, coming down into Egypt again, coming across that peninsula. So that's how this time we're talking about Israel getting down into Egypt. And if you just turn over to verse 30, or chapter 39, Joseph, if you remember, or if you don't remember, Joseph, he got sold into Potiphar's house. And then God blessed his work of his hands, and Potter started to be blessed himself because of Joseph. And at verse 34, it says, so Joseph found favor in the sight and attended him, and he made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. So Joseph, again, comes in across the top of the peninsula, gets sold into slavery, and then he makes a name for himself in Potiphar's house and rises to be over Potiphar's house. And then if you remember that passage about Joseph fleeing Potiphar's wife, does anybody remember the story that would like to tell it? Or y'all want me to tell it? So Potiphar's wife chased Joseph around, wanted him to have sex with her, and he refused. And then she claimed hey, he had his way with me and I was not willing. So Potiphar's put him in the prison, and then he's in prison there in Egypt, and then in then you have the cupbearer and the baker, if you remember the two prisoners. So Joseph kind of gets promoted through the prison system, so I don't know how the prison system worked, but it seemed like he was doing pretty good in prison. And the cupbearer and the baker had the dreams. And then Joseph interprets them dreams. One of them dies, the other one gets freed and gets put back into Pharaoh's service. And then Joseph stays in prison for a little while longer, and then when Pharaoh has his dreams, that's when they ask how the people couldn't interpret the dreams, and they said, hey, I remember a guy back here in prison. He can interpret dreams. And Joseph's brought forth. So let's turn to Genesis 41. And we're going to start in verse 25. So Pharaoh has given his dreams to Joseph, and this is what Joseph's reply is. 41, starting in verse 25. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one. The 7 lean years are ugly cows that came up after the 7 years. And the 7 empty ears, blighted from the east wind, are also 7 years of famine. It is, as I told Pharaoh, God has shown to Pharaoh what he's about to do. There will be 7 years of great plenty throughout the land of Egypt, but after them he will rise 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will consume the land. And plenty will be unknown in the land by reason of the famine that will follow, for it will be very severe. And doubling of Pharaoh's dreams means this thing is fixed by God, and God will shortly bring it about. Now therefore Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers over the land and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years. And let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming to store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. The food shall be a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine that is to occur in the land of Egypt, so that they may not perish from it. The proposal pleased Pharaoh and all the servants, and Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find a man like this in whom is the Spirit of God? And Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has shown you all this, there's none so discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards to my throne will I be greater than you. So I'm telling you all this, reading all this to you, bringing you up to a climax of this story. So Joseph, remember, he gets sold into slavery. He works his way up through Potiphar's house. He becomes head of Potiphar's house. And you could just see the God trying to humble him. He kind of gets knocked back down, and then he rises up again, and now he's rised to the point where he's only second in behind Pharaoh himself in Egypt. So he starts this big plan of saving for a famine. And that's one reason I read that about Abram coming down because of a famine, because we're fixing to get some more people that's coming down because of the famine, which is where the land of Goshen is going to come in. So if we look at Goshen, let's go to 42, verse 3. So we have Joseph, he's down in Egypt, and his brothers are still up in this area. And this is where 42 verse 3 then. But Jacob, 42, so 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. So this famine that we just described, that the Lord had predicted through Joseph, it's in full force now. They've used up their reserves up in the Canaan area, and 10 of the brothers come down. They're coming down to Egypt to buy grain because of the great famine. And again, they're coming across that peninsula that connects the two continents. And then 45, 1 through 3. So if you remember, there was a cup, and Joseph kind of paid his brothers back a little bit for what they had done to him. Threw one of the brothers in prison. Hey, go back and tell your dad, bring your youngest brother. And they go back. His dad's like, I'm not sending the youngest brother. He's not coming. And then when the boys went down there, Joseph did some other stuff. And then here, Joseph finally going to reveal himself that I am your brother that you did dirty. So 45 verse 1. Then Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood before him. You got to remember, he's like second in command. So you don't show a lot of emotion. When you're the higher up you go, the less emotion you really show. So he's up there. So that's just not something you do. But then when he couldn't control himself anymore, he cried. He made everyone go out from me, so no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. So that's when he revealed himself to his brothers that, hey, I'm the brother that you sold. And I don't know if I was there, you could just see the countenance on the brothers just kind of sinking like, uh-oh. My brother who I done that dirty, he's here. But Joseph talks about, hey, God meant this for great. It's for a good thing that you sold me into slavery. He could see God's handiwork in his past. So, as we think of some things that happened in our past, sometimes we need to look back and give God the glory. Paths that you had taken, when it happened, you think, wow, I don't know if that was good or not. But then once it all played out and you can look back on it, you can say, yeah, I can see God's hand in there, and that was probably good for me to go through that. So that's what Joseph has gone through. And he's saying, hey, that's all these dreams I had. This was leading me to this place that you selling me. This led me to this place where I'm here. And that's when he says, go get my father, and y'all come down here. So let's go to Genesis 45 and starting in verse 16. So when the report was heard in Pharaoh's house, Joseph's brothers have come. It pleased Pharaoh and his servants, and Pharaoh said to Joseph, say to your brothers, do this, load your beasts and go back to the land of Canaan, and take your father and your household, and come to me, and I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you shall eat the fat of the land. So that's great. So we talk about the land of Goshen. We're building up to that. How did we get to this point? So you had the great famine. The brothers come down to Egypt. Joseph reveals himself. Pharaoh's really happy because I imagine Joseph and Pharaoh probably talk quite frequently since he's the second in command about, hey, give me updates on grain and where we're at. Really pleased with Joseph. Bring your brothers down here and your family down here and move them down here. And then chapter 46, 2 and 4. And God spoke to Israel, Joseph's father, in a vision the night, and he said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, here I am. Then he said, I am God, the God of your fathers. Do not be afraid. Go down to Egypt, for there I will make you into a great nation. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I will bring you up again, and Joseph's hand shall close your eyes. So you can remember Israel, he thought his son had died when they threw him in the pit. They bloodied up his coat of many colors and sent it back. So God comes in a dream and says, go down to the land, and I'm going to make a nation there, which is key in the land of Goshen. That's what's going on. God's building a nation in the land of Goshen. So this is where they go in, Genesis 46, verse 26. All the persons belonging to Jacob came down to Egypt, who were his own descendants, not including Jacob's sons' wives, were 66 persons in all. So when we think about who's coming down into that land, you got 66 people, and it says, not including the wives. And maybe the wives, and that means wives and children, but that's what we had come down into the land of Egypt. And then the last one for right here, we're going to read 31 through 34. And Joseph said to his brothers and his father's house, I will go up and tell Pharaoh and will say to them, my brothers and my father's household who were in the land of Canaan have come to me. So you remember Pharaoh said, hey, go get your family, bring them down here. And we're talking, the 46 people, come bring them down. Or it wasn't 46 people, 60-something people. Go get them. So they've come in, and Joseph went and told Pharaoh, hey, my family's here. And the men are shepherds, for they have been keepers of livestock, and they have brought their flocks and their herds and all that they have. And when Pharaoh calls you, say, and it says, what is your occupation? You shall say, your servants have been keepers of livestock from our youth, even until now, both we and our fathers, in order that we may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. So they come down. I don't know where the seat of power was at that time. But they're saying, hey, we're shepherds, we're herders, and Pharaoh gives them the land of Goshen then. And let's read Genesis 47, verse 6. The land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best of the land. Let them settle in the land of Goshen. And if you know any able men among them, put them in charge of my livestock. So not only did Pharaoh say, you get to settle this land up here, and you look at all this desert and stuff, so Pharaoh, as the Lord has blessed the Egyptians by preparing them for the famine, now he's blessing the Israelites through Joseph, through the Pharaoh, and giving them the best land right here, which is the land of Goshen. So that's where the land of Goshen comes in. So this is where the Israelites end up settling, and then they turn into a nation. So you got to remember, a lot of brothers, got a lot of squabbles going on there with the brothers, and a lot of that gets settled while they're building the nation up here. And let's turn our chapter now. So we've been in the land maybe a couple hundred years now, which we'll talk about how long in just a minute, but we're a couple hundred years into probably where this occurs here in Exodus chapter 1 and verse 7. But the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. So you remember, there was just a very small amount, maybe less than 100 people that came down into that land. And now the Bible's telling you they've just exceeded and multiplied. I don't know what their growth rate was. If they had big families of 12 like they came from, there might have been a whole lot of people at that time, because I think predictions are over 1 million people coming out of the land of Israel. So these were very fruitful people. And then in verse 1:8, now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. So I don't know if this meant it's like the very next king, or maybe it's a few kings down the road. You know how generations, we kind of forget what happens in the past. And it just happens, so probably here something happened. They forgot about all the good that Joseph had done for the land. And they're starting to get worried. So when you think about that land, why would they be getting worried? You got Israelites just growing up here. And we get into Exodus 1:9, this is what they're thinking. And he said to his people, behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape the land. This is when they sent taskmasters over them. So when you think about why were they worried about that? So strategically, if I'm up here and there's a great nation, you would think after so many hundreds of years you'd consider them Egyptians, but they weren't. They must have kept their culture together at that time to the extent they could. But the Egyptians are really world, because guess what? We talked about this is the main path coming that separate the two continents. So if there's a war machine going to come down and invade, you think that's where they're going to be coming from. So they're worried about, hey, up there on my northern side, if they wanted to, we go to battle. we'll lose that part of Egypt and they'll join in. So they were kind of worried about that, and you could understand that. You got so many people up north that really aren't Egyptians. If you need to take the Lord's Supper, it's right down the hallway. If you'll follow James out the hallway, probably. So while they're in here, they made them they had taskmasters over them, made them basically slaves. And then if you look at verse 11, they set taskmasters over them and afflicted them with heavy burdens. They built for Pharaoh the store cities, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago, Pithom and Ramses. And they are right up here. So we talked about they weren't down here in Cairo building the pyramids. They were up here building the store cities. And I didn't realize I was running out of time this quick here. So let's look at one more verse, and then we're going to go to the bottom part of that peninsula. So let's turn to Exodus 12, verse 40. And the time that the people of Israel lived in Egypt was 430 years. So we want to know how long were they there? 430 years. Tells you right there. So they were 430 years, and they started to exit out. So let's talk about the Exodus. So 430 years, I think we all remember how the Lord brought the 10 plagues on the Egyptians, and then is let my people go, and then finally Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and the people were taken off. So it says they left the city of Ramses and went to Succoth, right up here. And that's Exodus 13. Let's just kind of follow along that storyline as much as we can here. So Exodus 13, verse 20. And they moved on from Succoth and encamped at Etham at the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar and a cloud to lead them along the way, and at night a pillar of fire, and gave them light that they might travel by day and by night. So they have left up here, and this is the land of Goshen where they'd settled. There's the city that they built. Come at Succoth, come down right here. And then we're looking at, they passed through the Red Sea, Exodus 14, verses 1 through 4. Then the Lord said to Moses, tell the people of Israel, turn back and camp in front of Pi-Hahiroth, between Migdal and the sea, in front of Baal-Zephon. You shall encamp facing it by the sea, and Pharaoh will say, and the people of Israel, they are wandering in the land, and the wilderness has shut them in. So this is where they're coming down, and they're going to cross the Red Sea right here. There's a lot of, if you search the internet, just like what I told you about when I did one of the pyramids, you're going to hear every story in the world. There's people who say, I don't know, it was a reed sea up here that they crossed. Which really makes no sense, because if you remember when they crossed the sea, the waters came in and destroyed the army. If you're in a little reed sea that you can walk across that's knee deep, don't really think how that part of the story happens, that they kill the army. You got folks that say, hey, I came up this way and then went down. The Lord says, don't go the way of the Philistines. Well, that road up there is the way of the Philistines. So you probably say, hey, that's not going that way. So it's telling you, it gives you some cities. I think there's probably a little leeway where these are at, but it's telling you the cities that they went to and where they crossed and are coming down. For time's sake, they crossed somewhere up through here, is believed, traditionally believed. I kind of go along with the traditional belief that this is the location probably where they crossed. They're coming down over here. If you remember, they come to a place called Moriah, And this is where they were complaining about water. And the Lord made the water sweet. They come down to Rephidim right here. So they're traveling down through here. At Rephidim, this is where Moses strikes the rock, and the water comes out of the rock. So you remember he strikes it later on, and he gets in trouble for that. He don't get to go to the promised land. But right here, he's told, hey, strike the rock. And the rock brought forth water. And you got to remember, there's about 1 million people or more that came up out of Egypt, so there must have been a pretty good flow of water come out through there. And then one last thing at Rephidim, and this will close the class. Again, we're down here now. So they've traveled quite a way after the Egyptians are destroyed. But that one's in Exodus 17. I want to read that one. To me, that's one of my favorite stories in the Old Testament. And let's go starting in verse 8. Then Elimelech came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. So down here, this is where Elimelech was. So Moses called Joshua, choose from among us and go out and fight Elimelech tomorrow, and I will stand on top of this hill with my staff of God in my hand. So Joshua did as Moses told him and fought with Amalek, while Moses, Aaron, and Hur went on top of the hill. Whenever Moses held his hands up, Israel prevailed, and when he lowered his hands, Amalek prevailed. So you can see him, he's up there with his staff. As long as his staff was in the air, they were defeating them, and then when his arm got tired, they started dropping a little bit, they start losing the war. Verse 12, but Moses' hands grew weary, so they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it, while Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on one side and one on the other side. So his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. And Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and the people with the sword. So the Lord said to Moses, write this as a memorial in the book and recite it to the ears of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. So that's what happened down here. So he struck the water, got the water, struck the rock, got the water for the Israelites. And then you got these people come in to attack. Moses up on the hill, lifting his arms up. And that just always reminded me, you got to surround yourself with good friends. When the battle's going on, it's wearisome when you're by yourself. But if you can find you a couple friends to help lift you up, the battle's going to be won. And that's what's so great about church being here. You got so many people here to lift you up. It's not just two people, one on each side. You got a multitude of people. And when we talk about the invitation about come forward, if you need somebody to pray for you, it's not necessarily, hey, pray for me because I've done something wrong. It's pray for me, I'm dealing with something. And there's probably somebody in this church that's gone through it. And I think that was brought out in one of these lessons not too long ago. So think about that, Joshua at Rephidim there. And thank you for coming to class. I think that bell's going to ring any minute. Sorry I had to speed through that last part. I got bogged down up front, but I just wanted to kind of give you the backstory, as if you didn't know it, how we got to the land of Goshen and then our trip out. And you're dismissed then.